Hello and welcome to our viewers from around the world. I'm Kristen Schwartz, licensed midwife and MC here at Gold. And here at Gold, we are in the middle of producing a brand new lecture pack. And the lecture pack is titled Lactation and Adversity, Addressing Challenges with Confidence. And here with me today is one of our speakers, Anna Brauch. Welcome, Anna.
Hi, thank you.
It's so lovely to have you here today. So, Anna, we're going to talk about your presentation in just a little bit, but let's get started. Tell our listeners, first of all, a little bit about your background. I know you started off your work in lactation as a Lactation League leader. So tell us a little bit about your background.
Yes, that's right. Thank you. I started my work in lactation as a Lactation League leader here in Minneapolis, Minnesota, is where I am in the United States, and I served as the Equity and Diversity Administrator for the Lactation League of Minnesota and the Dakotas, and as my work with the Lactation League grew, I decided to pursue certification as an international board certified lactation consultant. So I did that in 2018, and now I'm working for the Women, Infants, Children department here.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that, doing excellent work there out in the
Mhm.
community and for WIG. It's wonderful to hear that. So you're part of the Lactation Adversity Addressing Challenges with Confidence lecture pack. Your presentation is titled Supporting Dyads Facing Past Trauma and Gender Dysphoria. Um, Let me ask you this. How, as a lactation professional, talking to clients who had trauma, who have experienced trauma, as lactation professionals, as any kind of provider, healthcare provider in the field, how do we create trust? How do we create trust? Because these families have been already through a lot. There's trauma. How do we
Mm.
build that so we can show them we are a team here, we're working with you?
Yeah, yes, that's a really good question. And I think it's the question that should be driving, a lot of our work as prenatal or postpartum providers or birth
Mhm.
providers. And, I think, of course, the first rule is always first to do no harm. So to do no further harm by, taking away the autonomy or crossing the boundaries
Mm.
of the patient or the dyad that you're working with. And the biggest really component I think of it is just informed consent, um, and letting someone be in charge of their own care, and to make sure that any of the care that you're giving is working towards the end of meeting your patient's goals, or the family that you're working with meeting their goals, instead of projecting your own goals or your own plan onto them, and just using your skills in counseling or your skills as a provider
Mhm.
to care for them the way that they're asking for.
You brought up something really good there, and that's something really important, not projecting our own goals onto the client because we think we know best or we know what they need, right?
Mm-hmm.
When they are the experts on their body, their baby, and such, right? So there's a lot of listening involved, I can imagine, right? Just being there, holding space, listening. Um,
Right, absolutely. Yes. And making sure you're asking open-ended questions to get the most information, with, an open mind to what the answers might be, instead
mhm,
of projecting sort of, a script onto the conversation.
mhm.
And we have different, depending on what kind of provider you are, you may have a lot of room to do that in your counseling. For example, if you're working, strictly as a lactation consultant in an outpatient clinic or a WIC clinic or in home or something like that, you have a lot of a time and room to do that. And other providers, maybe if they're working in the hospital, or
Yeah.
working with people who are birthing or high client volumes, may have a smaller amount of time to do that, but it should still drive your care.
Absolutely, absolutely. Becoming a parent is a huge change for anybody, right? Right, covering from birth, postpartum, there's
Mhm.
sleep deprivation. There's so much going on, right? And then, but somebody with gender dysphoria, I can imagine that throws another, that brings it to another level. There's so
Mm.
much more involved, right?
Right, yes. And one of the things that I find to be very true about the GLBTQ community is that folks are very intentional about, planning their families, planning their birthing, and figuring things out ahead of time, which is kind of one of the qualities that is really great because people know that they're going to have to be planning for that sort of thing. And so often, one of the biggest things that can be helpful around that is to find answers to those questions beforehand of what that's going to
Mm,
be like and how you're going to deal with it, and to have a community of people, community of providers, friends, families, support network ahead of time,
mhm.
and to sort of crowdsource answers and solutions to those problems that might crop up.
Yeah, you made a very good point about being, the planning that goes into the process of, having a family that goes in. So that's actually wonderful to see, how much preparation is put in place before these families are working together to create that environment for themselves, but also and educating themselves, putting pieces in place. Do you see then a high breast chest feeding initiation rate in these families?
I think so, yeah. And yes, it's like you said, that's part of the sort of like intentionality of the
Mhm.
planning ahead, is that people are making their infant feeding choices with a lot of care and consideration, which isn't to say that, people outside of the community don't do
Right.
so as
Yeah.
well. But, we know in lactation that, the adage that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of treatment or something like that, or that a little bit of
Mhm.
planning ahead can really prevent a lot of the problems you might run into
Mhm.
after the fact, after the birth. So yeah, I think that people make those decisions very carefully and really putting a lot of weight on, both the sort of physical and mental health of the parent and also that of the baby.
Absolutely. Now, when it comes to trauma-informed care in your practice, or do you work also with other holistic providers like craniosacral therapists, chiropractors, acupuncturists, therapists?
Sure, yes. I probably the biggest other sort of holistic therapy that I incorporate into my own practice
Hmm.
would be herbal treatment, herbal therapy. I have on occasion referred to craniosacral therapists as well, and there's actually a pretty thriving community of chiropractic and craniosacral therapy providers in the city where I live. It's a pretty big and thriving, birth and postpartum community that we have here. So, people in other places may not have quite the same access, but there, hopefully are always resources that you can find. And yes, and I think that, you know, in in the same way that research is still really, really new and still developing, sort of in the field of thought that I'm talking about
Hmm.
in my talk, it also is in relation to things like craniosacral therapy and chiropractic and things like that when it comes to lactation and, just early um, infant feeding. And um, so I am always looking for the latest information and,
Hmm.
trying to make sure that my practice is both sort of evidence-based, but also, giving them for those things that don't quite have the evidence yet, but
Right.
that we're seeing anecdotally that they work.
That their work. Absolutely. Now let's talk about your presentation, supporting the diets facing post-trauma and gender dysphoria. Tell us, give us a little brief overview what can look forward to in this presentation.
Sure, yeah. So I'm speaking, as is clear in the title, about two sort of distinct barriers or just issues in lactation, which would be past trauma and then also gender dysphoria. And so they're also sort of distinct, but also to me make sense to lump them together because we're talking about breaking down barriers, most likely for people who are either marginalized or undergoing,
Hmm.
um, challenges to their mental health. And so we'll get working definitions for those terms so people know exactly what we're talking about, and then talk about approaches to, what we talked about, the standard of care for avoiding further traumatization, and then also just supporting and helping them meet their own goals in their breastfeeding, chest feeding, baby feeding journey. And, it isn't exactly, you may have, heard some talk on these topics before, like especially relating to gender, you may have some background information about it. And so this isn't exactly an introductory level. We're not going to go really far into the nuts and bolts of clinical support for people who are facing gender dysphoria, but we're also not going to spend a lot of time on the sort of like gender studies 101 sort of area. We're going to jump in somewhere in the middle. And so hopefully everybody can get a little bit out of that.
Fantastic. And I know in your presentation, also at the end, you have plenty of resources for people who want to also afterwards dive deeper as well, correct?
That's right.
Perfect. And now let us know, you have a website. If people want to find out a little bit more about you, where can they find you?
Yes, I have an active Facebook page that you could check out if you have Facebook, where you are in Anna Brauch Lactation Support, or I have a somewhat less active, but definitely still, you can find it on the web. My website is annabrauchlactationsupport.weebly.com, and it does have ways to get a hold of me, or you can read a little bit more about me, and certainly I'm available by email or Facebook or whatever with any questions or requests.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Anna, for sitting down here with me, chatting about the amazing work you're doing out there in the community and about the upcoming presentation here.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kristen.
And for our viewers now, the presentation, as I mentioned, is part of the lecture pack, Lactation and Adversity, Addressing Challenges with Confidence. And that will be available on March 29th. That's just around the corner. And you can find out more about this presentation and the other presentations in the lecture pack. You can go to goldlactation.com and goldlearning.com. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Bye-bye.